Hello. All right, so last class we finished off adding constraints by using the alter table command. So this is the idea that you already have a table created, but you want to now go and add an additional constraint to the table, so you would use this command to do that. In addition, some database designers may decide that they would prefer to create tables that don't include constraints, and then in their scripts, after they've created the table, have separate add or alter table commands that actually go and add those constraints. Okay, so this is pretty much where we finished off. Now we looked at, for example, here's an example where we're adding a check constraint. We're adding a unique constraint, we're adding a foreign key constraint, etc. And it turns out that if we're adding a not null constraint, the syntax is slightly different there. Okay, so let's just move on here with these notes. So it says here, it should be noted that the column, GIF, that's got to be some sort of typo. So the column must be set up as not null before one can add a primary key constraint. If it is not currently set up as not null, then use the alter table, alter column command to do so. Any type of constraint that you would add during the table creation. Okay, so the first part here, I'm not quite sure exactly what they mean. They're saying that if the table, if I read that correctly, it says that if there is no constraint on the column, you can't add a primary key. I don't think that's correct. So let's take a look at this example here. So this is the script that we had last time. So if I run this, it connects to the EX user, and then it creates two tables, vendors and invoices. So let's look at the vendors table. It has a constraint for its primary key. So I'm going to go ahead and just remove that. And because I'm removing the primary key, I'm also going to have to remove the foreign key constraint in the invoices table because it references vendors. So I'll run this and it works. So now let's use the alter table command and we'll add a primary key. And I expect that this will work. So alter table vendors. Okay, and we're going to add constraint, and we'll call this vendors underscore PK. And then I'll just put the primary key, and then I'll go vendor ID. Okay, so let's try running this. Okay, so as I said, that works. So the notes there, I think I know what they're maybe trying to say, but you can certainly add a primary key to the table after. And it turns out if I look at the vendors table and I go and look at the data, I'm going to refresh this. Okay. So I've got my columns here and I've got my data, and if I look at constraints, there's no, well, it's initializing, so there should be, okay, so I have a primary key constraint that I just added, and I have my check and unique constraints as well for the vendor name. And in data, there's nothing added there, okay? So I think what they mean though is that if there was some data in that table, it wouldn't allow us to do that. So let's do that now. We're going to go insert into vendors values, and I'm going to set null as the value for vendor ID, and for vendor name I'm going to say Eric. Okay, now that should work. So I'll run this again. Oh, okay, single quotes. Okay, so now we come in here, we create our tables, we insert a row, but now when we go to add the primary key, we now get an error. And that's because there's a null value in that column. So it says here, column contains null values, cannot alter to not null. So essentially you can't add a primary key in that situation. Okay. So, all right. So that just illustrates that point there. When you go to add a primary key, you can run into that situation. So I'm just going to undo these changes. Okay. And let's continue on. Oh, that's my old video. All right, so enabling and disabling constraints is the next topic here. I think it's pretty much the last one in the notes. So basically with this is the idea that you have a constraint there, but maybe you temporarily want to remove it, okay? So let's see here. Let's do an example. Let's create a new table here. So I'm going to I'll create a new script. And I'm going to connect to the EX user again. So I'll paste that at the top. And I want to create a new table. And so this will be an example where we're going to create a table for basketball player, okay? And the basketball player, will give them a column which will be their name, and we will also give them a column which will be their number, okay? And we'll put a check constraint on their number. And what would that check constraint be? Well, the number, let's say, should be greater than 0 and should be less than 100, okay? So I'm gonna set that up, and this will lead us into an example where, let's say, a new player joins the league, and they have special permission to wear number 0, okay? So that would mean that we can't actually insert into that table, right? Because the check constraint is going to stop us. So we can now look at disabling the constraint, adding this new special player, and then re-enabling the constraint after. Okay, so create table basketball. Okay, so yeah, player. Okay. Okay, so we'll go name, and that will say that is var char. Now, I have had this question asked, and that is, how do I know when I should use varchar or I should use char, okay? And it's a fairly simple, straightforward thing you can look for. If you know that the number of characters is going to be the same every time, then you should use char, okay? So for example, a postal code that's going to be 6 characters, you would want to use char for that, okay? For varchar though, that's a situation where you have a variable. So that the VAR, that stands for variable. So if it's a name and you don't know how many characters are in someone's name because you haven't received a name yet, you can assign a maximum to it. So in this case for name, I'm going to say varchar to 20. Okay, and I'll say number. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I guess it's going to be player number, and this will be of type number, and it'll have 2 digits. Okay. So now we need to add in our check constraint. Okay, so I'm gonna add this check constraint here. So I'm gonna add this as a table level constraint. So I'm not adding it in line with the column, but I'm adding it after my column definitions. Of course, I could do it either way, but this is just the one I'm choosing. So player number CK is going to be the name. It is a check constraint, and I'm going to say player number is greater than 0 and player number is less than 100. Okay, so let's try running this now. Okay, so it created the table. So I'm going to modify my script now just in case I need to change it. So I'll say drop table basketball player. Okay, so a new player joins the league, and I want them to have the number 0. So I'm going to, let's just add a few players. So I'm going to say insert into basketball player values, and so the name I'll say is Eric for this first one, and the player number is, okay, wait, and the player number is 22. Okay. All right. So yeah, I'll just run this again. We'll see that'll insert. Perfect. So now let's say I want to add another player. Okay, so I'll just pick a random name, and we'll say that we want the number 0. So this is a player that has special permission by the league to wear the number 0. Okay, but of course the check constraint is going to be violated. So this would be a situation where we would want to potentially disable the check constraint, add the basketball player, and then re-enable the check constraint. So these notes here, okay, are going to show us how to do that. So we can say alter table, and then we can say disable constraint and give it the constraint name. So this is another reason why it's important when we're adding our constraints to give them names. Remember, we don't have to do that. If we omit the name, because it is optional, then SQL will give us, it'll pick a name for us. So we want to give it a name. That way, if we need to do some sort of operation, remove it or disable it, we can do that easily. I mean, we'd have to look up the name that was given to it if otherwise. Okay, so here we go. I'm gonna, oops. Okay, so I'm gonna go alter table basketball player. And I'm going to say disable constraint player number check. Okay, and now I will do my insert, and of course after I'm done I should also re-enable it. So alter table, so I'm going to say enable constraint player number check. Okay, so let's clear this out and let's try this again. Uh-oh, it didn't quite work. Okay, so table created, table dropped, table created, 1 row inserted. Oh, okay, wait, I think it almost worked. Table basketball player altered, 1 row inserted. Okay, so it was when I went to alter the table to enable the constraint. Okay. All right, that's good. So here, let's just run this again, and we'll see that everything I have here is correct. Okay, so that all worked. The problem though is when I go to re-enable the constraint, it sees that there's a value in there, that there's a violation, and then that gets flagged. So I believe, I don't know if it's in these notes here. No, it's not. Okay, it's in the book though. Okay, so basically it's on page 323 in the textbook. There's a no validate optional keyword that I can use when I enable a constraint. And what that means, I believe, is, okay, so this is what the book says. You can use the no validate keyword to enable a constraint for new values only. So in other words, if you use the no validate keyword, it's not going to go back and check the values that are previously in the table. So that's what I want here. So I'm going to say enable, and I'm going to say no validate. Okay, so that means it's going to leave alone the basketball player with number 0. But if in the future I try to add an out of range number, it's going to flag it. Okay, there we go. And it worked. It was able to re-enable the constraint, and it didn't cause a problem. And if I were to go to my, sorry, not vendors, I'm going to refresh this. Okay, if I go to basketball player and data, I can see that there is the player John who has a player number of 0. So that's good. That's good. All right. Okay, let's keep going. All right, so we've done examples now where we've disabled and then re-enabled. And one of the reasons why you might want to do that is, like I said, you have some new data you need to enter. You know that the data is correct, but you have a check constraint that is stopping you. So disabling it, re-enabling it is probably the correct solution. You could remove the constraint, but most likely that is an important constraint in the database. So removing it would cause problems down the road. Okay, so the other option though would be that you could actually drop the constraint. And an important point comes up here is that a constraint can't be modified. So if I add a constraint and the constraint is, say, I give it a name and it's a check constraint, and I say that this number has to be greater than 50, okay? I can't go back in and modify the constraint and change it so it's greater than 60. What I have to do is I'd have to actually drop the constraint, completely remove it, and then add a new constraint with the same name that has that new condition. All right. Okay, so dropping constraints is really simple. So basically the syntax here is alter table, we give it the table name, and then we say drop. Now, it depends on the type of constraint that you're gonna have, what the syntax is gonna be. So you can, for example, just say drop primary key. You don't actually have to give a name for the primary key because there can only be one of them. The database is smart enough to realize, hey, we don't need a name here. Is there a primary key? Then just get rid of it. Now, if it's a other type of constraint, you're gonna have to say constraint and then give it the actual name of the constraint. And if it's a unique constraint, you're going to have to say unique and then specify the column name. So there's 3 sort of situations here, and those are listed in the notes. So we can see the example here, equip rating check. So this is a check constraint that's being dropped. So it's alter table equip, drop constraint, and then they give it the name, okay? If that was a not null constraint, if that was, I guess, a foreign key constraint, we would do the same thing there. Okay, this next one, dropping the primary key, alter table customers, drop primary key. Very, very simple. We don't even need to name the constraint. We can just say it's the primary key one and Oracle will take care of it. Okay, alter table customers, drop, okay, so this is all right, so we're still doing primary key. All right. Okay, so let's do this. So there can be problems when we drop primary keys. And this comes back to the last lecture where I was trying to sort of emphasize that relationship between the foreign key and the primary key. So what I can do to sort of illustrate dropping a primary key and some of the issues that can come up is, let's see here. Okay, we can go back to this. And so let's say I wanted to try to drop the vendor's primary key. So I would say alter table vendors, drop primary key. Okay. Now, I'm gonna just run, so typically I've been running the entire script, and that includes the connect command. But I'm just gonna run this. I don't wanna recreate everything each time. So that means if I run it right now, it's probably not gonna be able to find the vendors table. So see this button here? It just does the run statement, where this one runs the entire script. If I run this statement, yeah, it can't find the table. Okay, I'll just do that one more time so you can see clearly. Table or view does not exist. And that's because I didn't connect to the EX user, and the EX user contains the vendor table. So what I need to do is I need to prefix this with the user. So C $, or number sign, EX dot vendors. Okay? So that's saying that's the vendors table that's inside the EX user. So now when I run this, using just the run statement, okay, okay, hold on. So I do have to run the whole thing because I hadn't, anyway, let me just run this one time here. So I'm gonna cut this, I'll run the entire script. Now I've got my table back, and now I'm just going to run this. Now I know that vendors has a primary key. Okay, so here's the error that comes up. I try to drop that primary key, but it won't let me. It says, this unique primary key is referenced by some foreign keys. So it turns out that the invoices table, of course, has a foreign key that references the vendors table. So that is going to cause problems. So to fix that, if I come back to the notes, in this situation, I could say, alter table customers drop primary key cascade. Now, you probably, if this was a production database, you probably wouldn't want to do that because that relationship is important, that foreign key, primary key. So you would have to really know what you're doing because this is going to modify not only the primary key table, but it's going to modify any of the foreign key tables. So it could do a lot of damage to your database. Anytime you're doing these like on delete cascades or cascade this, you got to really be careful. So I'll do this though. So I'm just going to change this. So when I drop it, alter table, so I'm just going to drop the primary key and I'm going to put in the keyword cascade. So now this is going to work. Okay, and we can see table CX, EX vendors altered. And it also would have altered the invoices table as well. So if I were to go and look at the invoices table and look for the constraints, I will not see the invoices foreign key vendors because it was removed because I cascaded that change when I removed the primary key. So let's double check that. Let's go to invoices. And I'm going to go to constraints. And you'll notice here there is no foreign key constraint anymore. That's been removed. And that's because of the change, removing the primary key and cascading that change. Remove that. So it's a very powerful thing to do, and you probably want to be really careful when using that. I mean, obviously it doesn't matter now because we're just practicing. Okay. So back to our notes, and I think we're pretty much done. They're just showing the last little bit here. There's this table customer, and then there's a table department, and they're just showing the definition of those tables. Nothing really that interesting. And then they're doing a couple alter table commands on each of those. Okay. So the first one here, they're adding a foreign key constraint. And the second one, they're adding a foreign key constraint as well. Okay. All right, so I'm going to stop here. So we've completed these lecture slides here, and let you guys continue working on your assignment, which is due tomorrow. And once again, yeah, reach out on email if you're having any issues, anything I can help with, any questions, and I'll have a video for you tomorrow on Friday. Okay, have a great day.